Good morning. A college education is an important investment that helps people build their skills. And historically, it's been pretty clear that people that make this investment reap economic benefits that last over their lifetime. But we've all been hearing the stories, the widespread stories recently of college graduates who can't find jobs, or if they can find jobs, can't find jobs that utilize their education. But what we wanted to do today was to put some data to the anecdotes and see just how well or how difficult the labor market has been for recent college graduates. So there are three main questions that we're going to address. First, how bad is unemployment and underemployment for recent college graduates? Second, how have recent college graduates in our region fared? And then finally, we'll look at some differences in labor market outcomes depending on people's majors. So what we'll address is, are college graduates that have majors in certain fields actually doing better than others? So we'll start by looking at the question of unemployment and underemployment for recent college graduates. So this first chart maps out the unemployment rate first for the working age population as a whole, going back to 1990. The shaded areas represent recessions. And what we can see is that the unemployment rate rose to particularly high levels after the 2007 recession, but has been declining since 2010. Next, we show the unemployment rate for college graduates. And what we mean by college graduates for the purposes of this presentation are people with a bachelor's degree or higher. And there we can see that college graduates have fared better. The unemployment rate has been significantly lower, about half the rate that it's been for the working age population as a whole. And then if we look at recent college graduates, and for the purposes of this presentation, what we're going to define as recent college graduates are those with a bachelor's degree or higher that are 22 to 27 years old. So we're really trying to capture people that are first 5 years or so out of college getting their degree. And what we can see for that group is that their unemployment rate has actually been higher than for college graduates as a whole. So this is saying that recent college graduates are having more difficulty than college graduates in general. And we can also see that for all these groups, but also for recent college graduates, that perhaps no surprise, that unemployment over the past few years has been much higher than it's been at least over the past couple of decades. So now that we've shown that the unemployment rate for recent college graduates is higher than for college graduates as a whole, what I want to show is that in part, this reflects what we'll see is like a natural transition into the labor market. So let me show you what I mean. So what we're going to plot here is we're going to be looking at data for the 2009 to 11 period. We're going to be focusing on that period. That's the most recent period that we have data available to do this kind of analysis. And we're going to look at the unemployment rate for college graduates of different ages. So first, this is the unemployment rate during that period for college graduates at 22 years old. The unemployment rate was about 10%. And then it declined to about 8% by the time people were 23 years old. And then by the time people were 27, that unemployment rate declined to about 4%. And if you plot this as a line, you can see that it settles into that rate of about 4% by the time people reach their late 20s. This is saying that unemployment rate, that unemployment is higher for young college graduates, but that it declines with age. Now, to what extent is this normal? Well, for purposes of comparison, this is a similar line for the year 2000. And what we can see is that for 2000, first we see the same pattern, that unemployment is higher for people at younger ages and then declines with age, sort of settling in, again, around when people reach their late 20s. Certainly, we can see that unemployment was higher in recent years than it was in the past. 2000, just for the sake of comparison, 2000 was, of course, the peak of a long expansion and a tech boom. But what this shows is that even during a very strong labor market and during good economic times, that unemployment for young college graduates tends to be higher, but that it declines with age. And we see a similar pattern if we look at data going back further to, say, 1990 or 1980. So what this reflects is that there's a natural transition into the labor market as people get their degrees. It takes some time for people to find jobs, and that's not unusual, though this time around things do seem to be a little bit tougher. So it appears that recent college graduates take some time to find a job, but to what extent are they taking jobs below what their education has prepared them for? So to address this question, we're going to look at college graduate underemployment. Now, for our presentation, let me tell you what we mean by underemployment, how we're defining it. What we're going to do is we're going to classify jobs into two categories, and this is based on information from the Department of Labor. The first group of jobs are going to be jobs where a bachelor's degree is typically required. So these would be jobs like, say, a pharmacist, a social worker, or a software developer. We're going to classify a second group of jobs as jobs where a bachelor's degree is not required. So these would be, some of these jobs would be like, say, a retail salesperson or a food server, but they would also be jobs like an electrician or a healthcare technician as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to classify people, college graduates, working in these jobs where a bachelor's degree is typically not required as being underemployed. And we're going to look at some underemployment rates for this group. So first, what this chart shows is the underemployment rate based on our classification. So this first line is for college graduates as a whole, going through 2012. And this line is fairly steady at around 33%. So what that's saying is that at about a third, about 1 in 3 college graduates typically works in a job that doesn't require a degree. And this is, again, going back about 20 years, so it's a fairly steady number. So it's not unusual for college graduates, for a significant share of college graduates actually, to be working in jobs that typically don't require a degree. So some of this may be due to preference, some of it may not be due to preference, due to people being slotted into these jobs for various reasons, but there is a fairly stable percentage. This next line plots this underemployment rate for recent college graduates. Again, this is that 22 to 27-year-old age group. Now, we can see that that rate certainly is higher than it is for college graduates as a whole. That's similar to unemployment. Now, looking over time, this rate declined fairly significantly over the 1990s, again, during a period of long expansion and technology boom where a lot of these workers were integrated into the workforce. But beginning in 2000, this line began to increase, and it increased fairly sharply after the 2001 and 2007 recessions. So basically, the level that we see now is at around 45%. So what that's saying is that almost half of recent college graduates now are employed in jobs that typically don't require a degree. And that's actually, again, quite high compared to, say, 10 years ago, but similar to what prevailed in the early 90s. So even during the best of times, there is some of this underemployment that tends to persist in the labor force, but certainly it looks like recent years have gotten a little bit tougher. So just like we did for the unemployment rate, next we're going to look at this underemployment rate for people of different ages. We're going to again focus on this 2009 to 11 period first. And what this first bar shows is that the underemployment rate for 22-year-olds was about 56%. That number fell to about 53% for 23-year-olds, and then declined, and by the time people reached their late 20s, early 30s, it starts to reach this historical level of about a third. So it's similar to what we saw for the unemployment rate. There's this inverse relationship showing that underemployment tends to be higher for people of younger ages and then declines. So again, to what extent is this normal when compared with previous times in history? Well, again, for the purposes of comparison, here's the same line for the year 2000. Again, we can see the similar pattern where underemployment starts off relatively high for people who are younger and then falls over time. Though again, this 2009 to 11 period certainly looks like underemployment looks significantly higher. So what this is saying is that on the one hand, there is this, again, this natural transition, and this is true again if you look at earlier years, where underemployment tends to be relatively high for people of younger ages because it takes time for people to settle in and find the right jobs that fit their educational attainment, and that, again, takes some time. So it does appear that recent years have gotten tougher, but that some of this is actually somewhat typical. So next, we want to look at how recent college graduates in our region have fared. So what we're going to do is plot underemployment and unemployment for the region versus the nation. So this first set of bars shows the share of people who are underemployed and the share of people who are unemployed. Taken together, this accounts for about 52% of the workforce for the U.S. This is, again, this 2009 to 11 period. And what about for our region? Well, recent college graduates in our region, the numbers don't look terribly different, but there are some small differences. upstate New York, for example, while unemployment tends to be a little bit lower than the U.S. overall, underemployment actually tends to be somewhat higher. For downstate New York, it's a little bit of the opposite. The underemployment rate tends to be a little bit lower, but unemployment tends to be a little higher. For northern New Jersey, while underemployment tends to be fairly similar to the U.S., we see that there's a bit of a higher unemployment rate for recent college graduates. So while it's not unusual for recent college graduates to struggle to a certain extent when entering the labor market, we've seen that these past few years have been somewhat more challenging than in years past. But is this true for all college graduates? Or are there some that are graduating with majors in certain fields actually having better outcomes than others? So to address this question, we're going to use somewhat newly available data from the Census Bureau, which identifies people's undergraduate majors. And we're going to look at some differences in employment outcomes across these majors. So we're going to classify people into one of these 13 different majors. Unfortunately, the data are somewhat limited in that they only identify one's undergraduate major. They don't identify what fields people were studying for the graduate degrees, say for a master's or a law degree or a PhD. So what we're going to have to do for this part of the analysis is limit our analysis to those with a bachelor's degree only. So we're going to be taking out of our analysis from this point people who have higher level degrees. And what we're going to do first is we're going to look at some differences in employment outcomes across these majors. So we're going to start by looking at the share of those in jobs where a degree is required across these majors. So these blue bars to the left show the share of people in each of these majors who are working in jobs that typically require a bachelor's degree or higher. And this is, again, for that 2009 to 11 period. So, for example, for engineering majors, what this number is saying is that about 3/4 of engineering majors are working in jobs that typically require a degree. So they weren't necessarily engineering jobs. So these could be any jobs that tended to require a degree. So it could have been an electrical engineering job or, say, a financial manager. So just looking from the top to the bottom, engineering, about 3/4 of people were working in jobs that typically require a degree. At the low end of the spectrum, leisure and hospitality majors, only about 1/3 of people graduating with that major were working in jobs that typically required a bachelor's degree. And then kind of looking across the board, there are some themes that we can see. First, there are a couple majors that tend to provide technical training. So engineering and math and computers, those tend to be toward the top of the list. Also toward the top of the list are education and health majors. So this is not surprising given that the education and health sectors have been growing throughout the past several years. They've been growing, they grew through the recession, and they've also been growing through the recovery. Many of the more general degrees that provide more general training, like liberal arts, social sciences, communications, and business, they tend to be toward the bottom. So for these majors, it looks like less than half, slightly under half of people with majors in these fields are actually working in jobs that tend to require a degree. And finally, what we also do in this chart, these light blue bars to the right show the unemployment rate across these different majors. So these unemployment rates vary from around 3 to 8%. The lowest unemployment rates tend to be for people who have these education and health majors. And toward the middle are these majors that tend to provide more general training. That tend to be toward the middle or toward the top. In fact, toward the top of the list, liberal arts majors have some of the highest unemployment rates at about 8%. And those that provide technical training tend to be more toward the middle. So next what we're going to do is we're going to look at the average wages people earned across these majors. So we're going to begin looking at average wages for recent college graduates. So we're going to be looking at those under 27. We're going to be taking out people with higher level degrees again. And we're going to be doing some statistical adjustment to control for some differences and the characteristics of people across these majors, differences in gender, differences in location, and things like that. So what I'm going to show first are the average wages across these majors for recent college graduates, limiting this to people who are in jobs that typically require a degree. So this particular set of bars takes out people who are underemployed. It says if you're working in jobs that typically require a degree, what are the average wages? So you can see there's some pretty significant variation. Toward the top of the list, engineering majors tend to earn the highest wages at about $55,000 per year. At the bottom of the list, we have education majors. Education majors are somewhat, though, a unique animal in that a lot of people, obviously, who are getting their education majors are becoming teachers. Teachers don't necessarily work year-round, so we didn't do an adjustment to try and control for that. This is just their average annual wages. So that's why one of the reasons why education is toward the bottom. But if we look, again, there's sort of some themes toward the top of the list. Math and computers and healthcare tend to be toward the top of the list, around 50,000. Leisure and hospitality tends to be a little bit lower on the list. But regardless of major, for the purposes of comparison, across any major, all of these workers tended to, on average, this is on average, tended to earn more than the average person with just a high school diploma and the average person with an associate's degree. Now, this also raises the question, well, this is true for people who end up being able to take jobs where a degree is required, but what about those people who graduate with their four-year degree and some of these different majors, but they end up taking jobs where a degree is not required? So in essence, they're underemployed. What do their wages look like? Well, these light gray bars show their average wages. And there's a couple things to notice. Now, perhaps not surprisingly, their wages tend to be lower than their counterparts in different majors who were taking jobs where a degree is required. But regardless of which major, we can see that people who take these jobs where a degree is not required tend to earn more than those with just a high school diploma or those with an associate's degree. So, in summary, relatively high unemployment and underemployment is not unusual for recent college graduates. It's in fact typical, as it takes time for people to transition into the labor market, find a job, and perhaps find a job that utilizes their skills. But certainly the evidence suggests that young college workers in recent years have been struggling more than in the past. And looking across majors, those that tend to provide technical training and are geared toward growing segments of the economy have tended to fare better. But regardless of major, those with college degrees still tend to have better labor market outcomes than those without.